you worry anymore. Cause when life looks like easy street, there's danger at your door.
Hi everybody, day 15, quarantine history. I'd already started doing this and taping today's presentation and talked a little about how it's neat to be part of something that's happening in history that everyone will remember. And then my computer, the only computer I have with my school stuff on it, crashed and I almost crapped my pants, but I saved it, I got it back. Good news for me, maybe not for you, but I just had a panic attack. Sunday here for me. It's going to be Monday when you see this for you. I hope you're all well. I hope things are going good. I hope your family's safe. The word is that they're going to start to open the country a little bit. It'll be interesting to watch to see how that goes. It's tough times. There's a lot of people who are really suffering because of closing non-essential businesses, those kind of things. I will tell you, I'm one of the people in the country who is not that concerned about getting a haircut, and so at least I had that going for me. All right, moving on. The units about division. You've had a couple of days off here. The units about division. The country grew in size with the Louisiana Purchase, and we explored it and did those things, and had the war in the last unit with the British, and now we're dealing with the problems that come with that expansion. And the unit starts with the Missouri Compromise. That era of good feelings thing is going to go out the window here, starting today, where everyone was the same political party. Slavery had sort of been in the backdrop for 15 years or so. There wasn't a lot of rumblings about it, but the country is growing. The Industrial Revolution is going to come. Hired labor with the immigrants is going to start. And with the Missouri Compromise situation, the issue of slavery is going to rear its ugly head. And this time after that, when it rears its head with the Missouri Compromise, it's really not going to go away. It may not be front and center, but the controversy about it is going to stick around, and we'll get to tomorrow probably where some of that controversy is kept alive. But the country is going to start to split in half, and people are going to start to take sides, whether they're for or against slavery. But it's not going to go away, and so that will be the underlying theme moving ahead here. When I was with you Friday, we talked about the corrupt bargain and Adams' presidency. Andrew Jackson getting the most electoral college votes, Andrew Jackson getting the most popular votes, still not winning, and then the corrupt deal that John Adams makes with Henry Clay, and John Adams becomes president. I don't spend a whole lot of time, even on class, talking about John Adams' presidency because it only lasts 4 years. He makes a lot of enemies with this corrupt bargain thing, and this era of good feelings is kind of going out the window. You're going to see the development of a new political party, and so you're going to go back to a two-party system. And John Quincy Adams really doesn't get a whole lot of things done. I mean, it's a short presidency. He becomes very unpopular in the South. He becomes unpopular with a lot of the American public because most people, as you know, voted for Andrew Jackson. And he's just not going to get a lot of things done. He's going to ask for money for internal improvements in education. He wants to start the University of the United States and wants federal money to do it, and he really doesn't get any of those things. And so we don't spend too much time with John Quincy Adams' presidency because it's short, it's brief, not a whole lot of things get done. One interesting fact about John Quincy Adams, though, I think he's the only president who, after being president, a few years down the line, he's going to run for Congress again, and he's going to serve, I think, the United States House of Representatives. And so he'll serve in the federal government even after being president, which is odd. It's not something that Most presidents do. I think that most presidents, especially those who serve 2 terms, when it's over, have had enough politics for their life, and they walk away. John Quincy Adams, oddly, is not going to be that. He's going to go back. So we're going to start with Jacksonian democracy. And this is going to be important. I'll give you the answer if you're writing things down or keeping track. I'll give you the answer to the question on the test here in a minute. But the western states, and back then we're talking about Ohio and Kentucky and Illinois and Indiana, Tennessee, the western states, which are mostly frontier people, especially, at least initially, the western states start to take away the land ownership requirement for you to vote in national politics. When the Constitution was written, you had to be a white land-owning man, and the reason you had to be that was because they felt that if you didn't own anything, then you didn't have anything to lose when you voted, and it would be easy to kind of, according to them, it'd be easy to get people to buy your vote. I mean, how important it was to you, what you had to lose. But when you get to the turn of the century, you get to the 1800s, late 1790s, the western states are going to take that requirement away, and they're going to give the right to vote to all white men. Women, no. Africans, no. Free Africans, no. But all white men are going to start to get the chance to start being involved in politics. And when you allow more people to be involved, it changes the playing field. And I think the one that's important for us is, if you let regular people who are struggling to get by and who are working hard every day and don't own a whole lot, no different than politics today, people vote for candidates that are most like them. And so when you allow the normal everyday white guy who doesn't own land to get involved, he's going to look for somebody to vote for that's like him. And I think we all kind of know who that guy is, and I'll explain it to you in a second. But you get this period of what's called Jacksonian democracy, right? Political parties are going to start to hold conventions. Voting rights are going to be expanded to more people. More people are going to become active in politics. And this extension is called Jacksonian democracy. So I'm going to ask you on the test, I'm going to pause it so you can write this down for a second. On the test, I'm going to ask you, what do they call the expansion of voting rights and the increased participation in politics in the early 1800s? And the answer to that question is called Jacksonian democracy. It's the expansion of voting rights, and it's an increased participation in politics. And it's really going to change how politics works when you're adding a whole entire different class of people into the fray. If we were in class, we would spend some time, but in the 1700s, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, there's no football teams, there's no pro sports, there's no NASCAR, there's none of that stuff exists. And so most newspapers and stuff, most news services papers and stuff report on national politics, and people, way more so then than they are now, people pick a team, which is their political party, and they cheer and fight and root for their team to win. People back then would be way more involved in the political process than they are today, and they would be way more informed. Like I said, there's no NHL for them to watch. There's no NASCAR. There's no Netflix. There's no this is entertainment to them. People make speeches in Congress and they're printed across the country. People read them, and so they kind of know what's going on. All right. Obviously, it's from my basement, and so it's not a normal class thing for me and you. We would spend some time, and I have a thing to show you in school, but I don't have time now. We've been covering Andrew freaking Jackson, and we're almost done with him today and tomorrow, and that'll sort of be it with him. Really crazy life. And so I'm going to go through and just give you a real brief history with Andrew Jackson, stuff that you don't know already. And I tried to make a list off the top of my head this morning. I don't know what I missed, but I will tell you that Andrew Jackson was born in South Carolina. 3 weeks before he was born, his father was killed in a logging accident. Andrew Jackson and his family were poor. They were living on what then was the frontier in South Carolina. He had 2 older brothers. During the Revolutionary War, one of his brothers, his oldest brother, was killed in a battle. Him and his next oldest brother, the middle brother, joined the South Carolina militia. I think he's 12, 13 years old. He's not old enough to actually fight. His brother is. At one point, they both get captured. Andrew Jackson, like I said, about 12 years old, a British officer, as the story goes, a British officer attempts to, force Andrew Jackson to clean his mud off his boots. Andrew Jackson refuses. That officer takes out his broadsword and swings it at Andrew Jackson. He puts his arm up to stop it, and it hits him in the head and in the arm. And Andrew Jackson walked around his entire life with a scar on his head that was given to him by a British officer. And he is basically going to hate England and the British until the day he dies, which explains some of the motivation he has to slaughter them in New Orleans. They'll both be taken to a prisoner of war camp. Him and his brother will both get very, very sick. I can't remember if it was dysentery or what they got. Andrew Jackson's mom comes and gets them released. On the way home, his older brother dies, and so now it's just Andrew Jackson and his mom. She volunteers at one point during the Revolution to go care for sick American soldiers who are being held in boats in Charleston Harbor, and she'll get cholera and she'll die. And so at about the age of 14 or so, Andrew Jackson becomes an orphan. He'll move around from home to home. He will take a crack at being a teacher. He'll take a crack at being a saddle maker. Does some odd jobs. He did have sort of an education, mostly from his mom and the preachers when he grew up around them. Let me see. He's going to pass the South Carolina. Can't remember. He's going to pass the bar exam. I think it's North Carolina bar exam, and he'll become a lawyer. He'll eventually move to the territory of Tennessee. He'll be the first He'll be the first member of the House of Representatives from the state of Tennessee. He'll be elected senator from Tennessee, and he'll say that it sucks and he quits. He'll be elected as the commander of the Tennessee militia, which is where he gets involved with the whole Red Hawk War and Fort Mims and those things. And then eventually his success there will lead to him being commissioned by the United States military, and he'll end up in New Orleans. He was wealthy, but he was born poor. He'll gain that wealth. He at one point owned estimated up to 150 slaves, which would have made him one of the highest slave owners in the country. Andrew Jackson gets a lot of credit for duels that he was in. Some people say he was in hundreds. We're not exactly sure the number. It's probably more like about 5 or 6. The first time is as a lawyer in Tennessee. He kind of sets a lawyer up who is relatively popular. He sets him up, gets him to insult him, and then he passes him a letter that says he demands satisfaction, which was the way of saying something to someone you wanted to have a duel with them, because dueling even back then was illegal. Ultimately, Andrew Jackson and this famous attorney go out right that day in front of the Tennessee courthouse and take their paces turn, and both men shoot into the ground. But it's going to give Andrew Jackson a name in Tennessee and some credibility. The only duel that I'm aware of that he actually kills somebody, a guy by the name of Charles Dickens, writes an insulting letter to him about horse racing, and I don't know if it's cheating or whatever the case may be, and insults Jackson's wife, who is a totally different story. And this guy's trying to gain popularity, and so he challenges Jackson in a newspaper, and Jackson takes him up on the challenge. This guy Charles Dixon is supposed to be a great shot, and so they leave the state of Tennessee and go into Kentucky so that no one can be arrested. And to make a very long story short, they take their paces. Jackson decided that Dickens was supposed to be this great shot. He was going to let him shoot first, and they take their paces. They turn around. Dickens pulls up his gun, fires, and puts a round right in Jackson's heart. Not in his heart, right next to his heart. That bullet's going to stay there the rest of his life, by the way. And as the story goes, Jackson stood there, waited for the smoke to clear. The etiquette of dueling, that guy cannot move off his spot, and Jackson stands there for almost a minute before he shoots him. But he makes the guy stand there, and he kills him. That guy, by the way, Charles Dickens, when they tried to bring him back into Tennessee to bury him in Nashville, the people in Nashville wouldn't let him be buried there because he had challenged the city's hero, Andrew Jackson. And so he actually leaves a wife and a young child behind. His wife didn't even know he was going off to duel Andrew Jackson until she got a letter that he had been killed. And so Andrew Jackson's crazy life. He is actually shot twice. Once is in a street fight in Nashville. He gets in a street fight in a big brawl with people, gets shot in the shoulder. That bullet he doesn't carry around his whole life. I will tell you, and this is one of the questions on the test, he's the first president to be born poor. And he is also the first president who an assassination was attempted on his life. Some crazy guy outside of a funeral. He came outside of a funeral in Washington, D.C., and some guy pulled a pistol and pulled the trigger, and it didn't go off. He pulled a second pistol, pulled the trigger, it didn't go off, and at that point Andrew Jackson took his cane and beat the guy almost to death in the streets there in Washington, D.C. as President of the United States, but he was the first president to almost be assassinated. And so, I say Andrew freaking Jackson all the time in class, and you wonder why. It's just because he's just such a crazy thing, and his life is so crazy. He loses the election in 1820 for he shouldn't have, the whole corrupt deal kind of thing. He will actually be nominated for president in 1825, 3 years before the next election, which is earlier than any other person who's ever been nominated for president. In an effort to ensure that this doesn't happen again and the people get what they want, they're going to start a new party called the Democrats, separate from the Democratic Republicans. Mostly farmers, frontier settlers, what we, I guess, would consider back then normal people. The people who don't necessarily own land would get the right to vote. But they're going to be called the Democrats. I think I've told some of you this before. The Democrats, it's the same Democrats as today. They're the party of Andrew Jackson. That's why it's a little strange to see. It's a little strange to see the picture of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office with Trump. I mean, there are reasons why I don't have time to get into, but he's the original Democrat, Andrew Jackson. The donkey is the symbol, and the reason the donkey is the symbol is because people called Andrew Jackson a jackass, and he kind of liked it. And it's been around ever since. The elephant's a different story for a different day. His opponents start to call themselves National Republicans. The Democratic Republicans that Jefferson created are about to fall apart. There's the normal back and forth between Adams and Jackson and campaigning, and ultimately we know that Jackson is going to win. It's really kind of a landslide. He gets 56% of the popular vote. He gets 68% electoral college vote. There won't be a House of Representatives deciding at this time, and Andrew Jackson becomes president. He's going to name the vice president is going to be John C. Calhoun, who was really creepy looking. If you woke up in the middle of the night and found him standing over your bed, you would probably die of a heart attack. But he's going to win. It's not going to be close. I will tell you one more side note with Andrew Jackson before we go. Andrew Jackson, the common man's president. Andrew Jackson is going to, after the inauguration in Washington, D.C. By the way, his wife died. I shouldn't even get into it. His wife dies 3 weeks after he's elected president. It's a totally different story. You look it up if you want. Andrew Jackson is going to invite people to the White House, common people. He's going to invite them to the White House after his inauguration speech, and a couple thousand people show up, and it gets completely out of control. He actually has to sneak out a window out back to get out of the place, and they basically open the doors to the White House, and this crowd of people from across the country who came to see him being inaugurated as president flood the White House, and it's utter mayhem. I mean, people were cutting pieces of curtains and cutting pieces of carpets and stealing stuff as souvenirs. It turns into almost a riot. To get the people out of the house, they actually took barrels of whiskey and put them in the front lawn of the White House to persuade people to leave the house and go outside and drink. And as they got people outside, they started closing the doors behind them. Another part of Andrew Jackson's crazy, crazy life. All right, this is running a little bit long. I'll see you tomorrow for day 16, Jacksonian democracy. Remember, it's the expansion of voting rights and participation in politics, and it's all due to the changing of voting rights. Hey, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Well, the first days are the hardest days, don't you worry anymore. 'Cause when life looks like easy street, there's danger at your door.